I'm going to turn this over to Roberta Jump. Like I said, she's a certified diabetes educator at Lexington Medical Center at Swansea and also Batesburg, Leesville. She's going to be speaking to us today about diabetes and depression. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Roberta. Take it away, Roberta.
Hey, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Natalie?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me, Miss Jane? Okay. All right. Well, welcome to tonight's presentation. And we thought we would talk about diabetes and depression tonight because there is a link between diabetes and depression. I'm going to share my screen so you can see the, let's see, the host disabled my screen sharing. Natalie, would you mind enabling the screen sharing for me?
Yes.
Please. Thank you.
Hold on. Let me make sure I know what I'm doing. Share screen. Oh, not my screen. Hold on, Roberta.
Okay.
Always have to be. All right. See if you can share it now.
All right. Looks like I can. Let me pull this up and do a slideshow. See if it'll work. From the beginning. All right, can everyone see the screen?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All right.
All right. So, so again, this is called Diabetes and Depression, Eating to Improve Your Mood. We always like to talk about eating as dietitians. Do you think that depression is very serious? You can answer. You can unmute yourselves and answer because this is an interactive type of class. So you can unmute yourselves and speak, and it kind of encourages me. So Mr. Tony, you can unmute yourself. Miss Alice, you can unmute yourself. Okay.
Alice has responded, yes, that she does think this is a serious issue.
Oh, she's just typing. Okay. So major or long-lasting depression is very serious. And this is just very general in nature. If you feel like you have depression or have a tendency toward depression, then we would encourage you to seek out help from a physician and counselor, maybe get your primary care physician to refer you to a counselor or someone that could help with depression, because it is definitely a serious disease. How many people have depression? Well, right now we're looking at about 200 million people worldwide, maybe higher than that, currently affecting more than 19 million Americans. And that's serious depression. That's not just mild or situational depression. Situational depression is something that happens in our lives that causes us to have temporary depression, like maybe the loss of a loved one or a loss of a job or something like that. But aside from the situational depression, what we're talking about here is serious and long-lasting depression. The cost is over $70 billion in treatment and disability and lost productivity in the US. And then on the bottom of the slide, there's a map of where we see a lot, their rates of depression. And the states with the darker blue have a higher rate of depression. So we can see that there's a lot of depression in the United States. How do we know if we are experiencing depression? Well, we could feel sad, sadness and gloom. Just you wake up in the morning and you just don't have a happy feeling, just continually sad, gloomy. One major characteristic is hopelessness. You just feel like there's really no way out and you don't see any light at the end of the tunnel. And some of the things that come from this hopelessness is some people eat more than they should. They don't eat enough. They either the appetite goes one way or the other. Some people can't sleep, and some people all they want to do is sleep. People can't concentrate very easily, have negative thoughts most of the time. And another characteristic is difficulty in making plans and executing them. Just hard to make decisions, hard to carry through with decisions, just feeling like you're not wanting to do a whole lot. So these are some warning signs that you should talk to your provider about if you're experiencing them more than 2 weeks or so. So how dangerous is depression? Right here on the first line, we see increases the risk of fatal stroke by how much? 50%. Is that a mild stroke? No, it says fatal stroke. So that's very serious and very dangerous. Depression can weaken our immune system. So with all of these viruses that are coming around, we're more likely to catch them and be sick from them. It can reduce the size of the key areas in our brain that we use for memory and learning. It could run our blood pressure up, and it could actually help to contribute to osteoporosis. And we really don't think about depression as affecting our bones, but it could. Studies indicate that the development of recurrent heart disease, depression outweighs the other well-known heart disease risk factors. So we know that depression can be a huge factor in heart disease as well.
Okay.
Did you have a question? Okay. And these quotes come from Dr. Neil Nedley, and he is a depression expert. He's been studying depression for decades. And so this book that he wrote is called Depression: The Way Out. There's a lot of people that write about depression, but I chose Dr. Nedley because over 80% of the people that follow his program, they are able to come off their antidepressants and stay off. So a lot of providers, they'll just put people on medication, but Dr. Nedley provides the information that people could use to be able to come off their medication. And that needs to be done, of course, with a doctor's guidance. But to not need depression antidepressants anymore, it's a good goal to be able to have. So he's more focused on helping people to overcome their depression the natural way. So Dr. Nedley, this is a picture of his book here in the slide, Depression: The Way Out. You can go ahead and call the local library and ask to have it sent or brought to your library so you could check it out. If you wanted to purchase it, it's about $40 on Dr. Neil Nedley's website. You can just Google Neil Nedley, Depression: The Way Out, and you might be able to buy it. I think it's still in print. It was published about 15 years ago, I believe. But one interesting thing about Dr. Nedley's approach to depression, he discovered that a lot of his patients were depressed and that a lot of other patients of other PCPs were depressed. And so he started researching about what causes depression. And he thought there might be just a few factors, but he found that there were over 100 things that might lead to depression. So he put them into categories, and he calls them HIT categories because we experience depression right here in the frontal part of our brain. That's where we experience it, where we have these negative moods and things. And so he started studying to find out what affects the frontal lobe. And then he found over 100 things and he divided them into categories. Now, 2 of these categories we cannot do anything about, but the other 8 categories we can do something about. And here's something very interesting. Dr. Nedley says that depression occurs as we are experiencing more and more of these categories. If we have just 1 or 2 of these categories in our lives, we won't have depression. But as we go to the 4th category and higher, it's almost like a bone that has too much pressure on it. If you have a bone with too much pressure, it's eventually going to break. The same thing with our brain. If we put too much pressure on it, too many of those categories, then our brain develops this depression. And so 2 things we can't do anything about, but the other 8 we can. So I just like to cover them just very briefly. And if you're interested, then the book really explains them in a lot more detail. So the first 2 categories are the ones that we can't do anything about. The first one is genetic. So if we have a family history of depression or suicide, then there's really nothing we can do about that. It's genetic. What we can control is how our genes are expressed. So what we're given is one thing, but what we do with what we have is another thing. And there's people that can overcome some of the genetic things that are in their bodies. But with depression, it's there. If you have a family history, it's there. The other thing we can't do anything about is what happened to us in our early childhood. So some of these things on this list happen to people, and they begin their lives, as young children, having some of these hit categories leading to depression. The third thing on this list is not being raised by both biological parents. Now, when most of us who are older were in school, most of the kids in our classes lived with both of their biological parents. But how about today? There's a lot of children that are not being raised by their biological parents, and that's actually a factor in depression for the young people. The next category is social, and some of these things under social hits are living in an abusive relationship, dysfunctional family. If we go down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the sixth thing on the list, grandparents who raise their own grandchildren. There's a lot of that's going on, and that's a very hard stress on some grandparents. I had a patient that was she raised her children, she raised her grandchildren, and now she's raising her great-grandchildren. And it's a big stress on her. If we have unresolved conflict with others or ourselves, or if we are living with an immediate family member who is a drug addict or alcoholic, these are some things that could lead to depression as well from a social aspect. The next category is toxic hits. So if we have heavy metals in our body, lead used to be in gasoline. So sometimes it's found in the soil surrounding interstates. When leaded gasoline the fumes would settle into that soil. Mercury we can find in some seafoods and in some vaccines and in some fillings in our mouth. And then other types of toxins can be in our bodies from other sources. But this buildup of the toxins can lead to depression because it affects our mind. This is an interesting one. Circadian rhythm is very important for us to have proper sleep. And what we mean by proper sleep is sleeping from 6 to 9 hours each night. And the earlier we go to bed, the better, because we release some hormones between dark time and midnight that help us avoid depression. And if we're going to bed much after midnight, or if we're sleeping longer than 9 hours a day routinely, less than 6 hours a day routinely, or not having regular hours for sleeping and eating, these things can actually affect our brain. So it leads us more toward depression. It's another depression hit. So there's some people that I know, some of our patients, they work rotating shifts. Their shifts are changed all the time. And a lot of them have depression because their brain is just not in a normal rhythm because of their sleep. So this is a very important one. Again, we want to go to sleep as early as possible before midnight in order to avoid depression from a circadian rhythm perspective. The next category is addiction hits. So if a person uses illicit drugs or smokes tobacco, drinks alcohol, heavy caffeine, this could affect the frontal part of the brain. Lifestyle hits would be not being in a regular exercise program, not ever being in daylight 30 minutes a day, and rarely breathing fresh air. So the daylight does a lot of good things. It helps us make vitamin D. It also it takes a part in that circadian rhythm. If we're in the sunshine in the morning, then our brain will make melatonin. And when we go to bed before midnight, then our brain will release melatonin. And that's very important in avoiding depression. So our lifestyle plays a big part in whether we are prone to depression or not. The next category would be medical conditions. And that could include diabetes. But it could also include other things. Some of these diseases on this list, these are terminal. You know, the person finds out that they have this disease and they feel like their life is going to be shortened. Some of these diseases do have treatments to help lengthen the life, but I think for the most part, the intensity of the disease and also the amount of help that the person needs to complete their activities of daily living could lead to depression. So if you have to have someone taking care of you, you can't drive, you can't cook for yourself, you can't use the bathroom for yourself, you're in pain all the time, the worse that gets, the worse the risk of depression. So some of these things can be overcome. We know that a lot of these diseases can be managed, and that would enable the person to keep, their normal activities of daily living and help them avoid depression. But medical conditions can lead to depression. Things that directly affect the frontal lobe. So what's this kitty doing right here? Well, he's just sitting there and he's watching TV, and I don't know if that's soda or beer. He's got some chips going on. So some of these things that this kitty is doing is affecting the brain, and the same thing with us. So what does our brain use for energy? We teach this in diabetes education. The brain wants glucose for energy. So one of the most popular diets now is the keto diet, where you're severely restricting your carbohydrates. And when we do that, we're not supplying the brain with enough glucose, and the brain starts to maybe use some ketones for energy. But the brain wants to use glucose for energy, which we get from carbohydrates. So if we're decreasing our carbohydrates too low, then the brain is not getting the glucose that it needs, and that could lead to depression. Same thing, eating too much bad fat, the high meat, the high cheese diet, lots of rich food. That fat can make our blood thick and sludgy. And so the circulation in the frontal part of the brain is not working very well, or as well as it should be. And when we don't have that perfect circulation in our brain, that could lead to depression. Regular entertainment, TV viewer or movie attendee. This has something to do with the how fast the scene changes in the movie. So back in the day when we watched I Love Lucy or Andy Griffith, the scene changed with the camera only every few minutes. But now if you notice on commercials and entertainment television and movies, the scene changes every 3 seconds, within 3 seconds. And that affects our brain to the point where it might make us prone to depression. Our brains are not supposed to be looking at scenery changing that fast, and it affects our mind. Rock and country music, it's not the music itself, like the actual playing of the instruments, but it's something called syncopation, where the beat of the music is opposite of the way that the heart beats, and that affects the brain as well. Hypnosis, Eastern meditation, never doing any abstract thinking or spiritual study or going against your conscience. These things can affect the frontal lobe of our brain and hurt it to the point where we're making ourselves prone to depression. Nutrition category, if we're not taking in enough B vitamins, especially B12, if we're not taking in omega-3s, and we can get those from, we'll talk about some of the sources in just a little bit. Tryptophan, folic acid, or if we have too much of cholesterol, saturated fat, or sugar, if we lose weight too quickly, or if we're not really eating the way we should, those nutritional, the depletion of the nutrients can affect our brain and lead to depression, contribute to it anyway. So when we eat something that raises our blood sugar fast, like we drink a soda or we eat a lot of candy, the refined sugar enters the digestive system and the blood sugar goes up. When the blood sugar goes up, our pancreas, which is right underneath our stomach, it responds by producing a large amount of insulin. Now, if we have diabetes, we may not make as much insulin as we need to, but if the pancreas is working normally, it will release the insulin. And then too much insulin drives our blood sugar low. And we said before that the brain runs on glucose. So if we have too much insulin, making our blood sugar too low. That way it affects the frontal lobe the same as if we maybe went on a keto diet. So depression has a lot of different facets. We looked at 10 different categories. And whenever someone has depression, the doctors want to find out the cause and deal with the cause. Is it the blood flow to the brain? Is it the sleeping habits? Is it the nutrition that the person is eating? Is it the person's perception of how bad their medical condition is? And whatever those aspects are, whatever those facets are, the doctor or the PCP would want to find out and try to deal with that instead of just giving a pill for an antidepressant. So if the person's not eating correctly and the person starts to eat correctly, then the depression can be relieved without the pill. And that's the goal. Sometimes we lean on our emotional brain. So we kind of let our heart take over. We just kind of let our emotions run and we just continue to think negatively. And then that negative thinking pattern becomes a habit. And then the habit can lead to depression over the years. So we need to reverse this pattern with positive thinking and healthy habits. So let's say you wake up in the morning and you think to yourself, I'm just a failure. You know, I'm just a failure. What can you think to yourself in order to reverse that thought pattern? If you would unmute yourselves and tell me, your brain tells you you're a failure. Tell me what are some things you can think of to reverse that pattern of thinking. Anyone want to join in or type in an answer?
I think I've seen where people list like things that they are thankful for. That is one way, because once you start listing all the things that you're thankful for, you realize there is something and maybe there's less negative than you were thinking.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Anything else? Any other ideas? How about thinking about things that you have done in your life that have turned out well? You know, what have you done that has turned out well? And I think for me, and I'm a person that likes to please people. So what helps me to overcome some negative thoughts is thinking about times that I was able to help somebody. And they were thankful that they were helped, and you know their lives were better because they were helped, and that kind of that helps me to stay out of any negative thinking habits. And that's one thing about depression. When someone's trying to recover from depression, they are asked to help other people, because when we help other people, do nice things for other people, a lot of times that resets our brain and helps us to have a more positive thinking pattern as well.
And Roberta, Alice also put in the chat, doing something for someone else helps with depression.
That's perfect. Yeah, exactly. So the more that we focus on that, what we've done in our lives that has worked out well, things that we're thankful for, and thinking about ways that we could help other people, those are very strong ways to help us overcome depression. So we already talked about the first thing on this list. Contemplate and explore potential options and solutions to problems. A lot of people feel like they have a sense of hopelessness because they don't see a way out. And so if there's any way, if you're facing a problem and you can think to yourself, what can I do? What's the worst that could happen? And if the worst that could happen happened, what would I do? How would I be prepared for that? And we can never be prepared for everything that happens in our lives. But if we try to prepare the best we can, that way, if something negative happens and we're ready, then, you know, it could be a good thing. Some people might worry about a hurricane coming. Oh no, a hurricane's coming. What can I do if the worst happens? Well, you know, you want to make sure you have food and water and a way to light your home, and maybe a generator if you have one, that just preparing, and that's just one example, but there's just other things that we are concerned about as humans. And if we feel like we can get ourselves ready to be prepared to face that, then I think that gives us, it takes away our hopelessness if it empowers us. We want to think logically. What would you tell someone else if you were thinking about something, it was bothering you, if you were feeling some feelings of depression, if someone came to you like a friend and said the same things that you were thinking, how would you counsel your friend? What would you say to your friend? And so you can say the same things to yourself. Counsel yourself as you would counsel another person. And then get spiritual help. You know, if you go to a church and you have a pastor or a chaplain or someone that you can pray with, if you're a spiritual person, or just someone to confide in that can pray for you, that really helps people a lot of times as well. So just remember that there's always hope. We want to cultivate health habits that improve the front brain's functioning. So on the bottom of the screen here, we see two brains. And on the left-hand side, that is a depressed brain. The yellow in the brain means activity. It's electrical activity. Our brain is an electrical organ. And so with a depressed brain, we see more blue and less yellow. On the right-hand side, that is a brain that is not depressed. So that's a busy brain with a lot of electrical activity. So the recommendation is to participate in some wholesome physical and mental exercises. And we know what we mean by physical exercises. But what are some mental exercises that we could do in order to help our brain to work better and to stay sharp? Almost like a muscle. If you don't use it, you lose it. So what are some things that we can do to challenge our brain and to do mental exercises with our brain? So tell me your thoughts.
Would doing crossword puzzles be the same thing as a mental exercise?
That's perfect. A crossword puzzle would be a perfect example. What else can you think of?
Alice says Sudoku.
Yeah, Sudoku is perfect. And anyone that can do that, I admire you, because I'm not a math person. I like doing the crossword.
Yeah.
I like doing the crossword puzzles and the find a words and things like that. But Sudoku, somebody can do that, that really impresses me. And so all of those different types of things, crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, Sudoku, those really challenge the brain, especially things where you have to move things around. Like I have a grandson that has a train set. He has a little wooden tracks, and we're always thinking of ways to put the tracks. And you have to think about, okay, how's this curved piece going to fit in with the straight piece? And it really helps the brain. The other thing that we can do is abstract thinking, and that would be maybe reading a story or maybe reading a scripture in the Bible and thinking about how does that apply to me? So you're taking something that you're reading and you're applying it, and you're putting yourself in that position, and you're thinking about how you would act in that situation. So that's abstract thinking, and that is very powerful for making our brains strong as well. So thank you for those answers.
Roberta, I want to interject. Also, we had a suggestion from Tony, who said learning a new complicated piece of music.
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah, music really stimulates the brain. I have a friend who's in his 80s, and he owns a company in California where he goes to the inner city and they give children musical instruments and teach them music. And he said it really is making a huge difference in their ability to learn other things. So you're exactly right with music. Thank you for suggesting that, Tony. Yeah. So we want to get rid of habits that actually hurt our brain. You know, alcohol, caffeine, and stimulating foods, they hurt our brain. And then we want to focus on balanced nutrition. So here we get to the crux of the matter, eating to improve your mood. What kind of diet improves the electrical balance between the frontal lobe and the lower regions of the brain? What kind of diet do you see there? A plant diet. So there's a lot of electrical activity in the plants. There's all of these electrolytes like sodium and chloride and potassium. And when we eat those foods, that it helps our body and our brain to have the electrical activity that it needs as well. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter. That just means it's a little chemical that travels between the nerve tissues, and it's thought to be contributing to well-being and happiness. And so in order to produce serotonin, we need to have tryptophan. And so when we eat foods that are high in tryptophan, that helps our body to create or manufacture the serotonin, the happy chemical, okay? So we'll talk about tryptophan again in just a minute. So complex carbohydrates, which are our whole grains, our whole fruits, our legumes, and our vegetables, that helps to deliver tryptophan into the brain where it can be used to make serotonin. So where can we find tryptophan? Y'all like black-eyed peas, black walnuts, almonds, sesame seeds, pumpkin seeds, and soybeans? Look at, these are some of the highest levels of tryptophan. So if you like those types of foods, add them more into your diet. Don't just have the black-eyed peas on New Year's Day. You can have them throughout the year, and then also add the nuts and the seeds in. When we eat too much saturated fat, it stops the communication, the very good communication between the nerves. So that might contribute to depression as well. And we know that saturated fat also contributes to the blood, getting a little bit thicker, a little bit harder to circulate through the body. I don't know if you've ever heard of the term rouleau, but rouleau means that the red blood cells just start to stick together and stack up. And so it's very difficult for them to go through the teeny little blood vessels. And so it kind of slows down the circulation. So saturated fats and too much sugar and too much overall fat can cause rouleau in the blood system. And that would slow down the circulation to the brain. So what we need some more of is omega-3 fats. And these are extremely important in avoiding depression. Too much omega-6 fat, which is more of our typical vegetable oils, can decrease the benefit of omega-3. So we can find omega-3 in some fish, but we also find other things in fish that would be harmful, like those heavy metals that we were talking about, and some other things that are in the ocean water that are not so healthy. So where can we find omega-3 that would not be in fish? Well, here they are. Black walnuts again, which are also high in tryptophan. English walnuts, very high in omega-3. Hemp seeds and chia seeds, and there's a question mark there. So what type of food, or what food is the highest in omega-3? Besides, not fish, but what plant food is the highest in omega-3? Can you guess?
Soybeans.
That's a good guess. Any other guesses? What do you think, Tony? I can see you thinking there on your picture. All right, so the answer is flax seeds. So do y'all use flax seeds?
Yes, I have.
You can grind them up and you can put them in your smoothies. You can put them in your oatmeal. You can bake them into your bread. You can make pancakes with them. And flax seeds go very well with oats. So if you're ever doing, oatmeal pancakes or oatmeal, it's a wonderful thing. You can also stir your flax seeds into applesauce or yogurt. So try to include at least 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed every day, and maybe have a 4th cup of walnuts as well. And walnuts are shaped like the brain. When we take the shell off the walnuts, they look like the brain. So that's a hint to us. Walnuts are good for the brain. Folate deficiency can directly result in depression. And so what we want to do is make sure that we get our folate, and we can take it in a pill, but it's much better to have our folate in the form of real foods. So let's see what foods are high in folate. Y'all like mustard greens, spinach and navy beans and okra and kidney beans and lentils? Take a guess for me. What is the highest source of folate in the plant kingdom? You want to guess?
Kale.
You said kale?
Yes.
That's a good guess. Any other guesses? Y'all are shy. Black-eyed peas. So again, we've got folate and we've got tryptophan in the black-eyed peas. So again, don't have them just on New Year's Day. You can have them through the year. B12 deficiency is linked to depression. And a lot of folks, as we get older, we cannot absorb vitamin B12. We can maybe get enough in a supplement or in our foods, but we need a special kind of, we call it intrinsic factor. We need to manufacture that in order to get B12 from the digestive system into the blood. And as we get older, sometimes we can't do that. So some people have to have B12 injections. Some of the best sources of B12 would be your low-fat animal sources, so your egg whites, your skim milk, and your chicken breast. We can also find B12 in fortified plant sources, fortified cereals, and plant-based milks. And you can also get it in a you can get it in a supplement form, and they do have B12 that you can put under your tongue, and it would be partially absorbed into your bloodstream by putting it under your tongue. It's a fast-acting, it's a fast-dissolving B12. Did you have a question, Ms. Jane?
Well, I was just going to say, I just found out the last time I had blood work done, my B12 was very low. And they told me that metformin causes that.
Yes, yes.
So I've been taking B12 shots every month, and I can see a difference in my energy level and everything. So
yeah, I tell all my patients to ask their doctors to do a B12 level on them every year, because if our B12 is low, that could feel like neuropathy. So we may have tingling in our fingers and our toes, and we may think it's diabetic neuropathy when really it's a vitamin B12 deficiency. So thank you so much, Ms. Jane, for that. You're right. And if you know anybody on metformin, ask them to have their B12 levels checked every year. Good point. So vitamin E is important in avoiding depression. Where do we find vitamin E? Well, these are some really good sources: wheat germ. And if you're eating whole grains like whole wheat bread and other types of whole grains, we can find vitamin E there. It's very plentiful in a lot of seeds and nuts, even in kiwi fruit and tomatoes. So if we have a good variety of these things, then we should be getting plenty of vitamin E. Legumes are very helpful in helping to avoid depression. We noticed the black-eyed peas were high in the tryptophan and the folate. And again, some of these other beans are high in folate, but they're excellent for the brain. Nuts and seeds, again, flax seeds, ground flax seeds are the best as far as omega-3, but there's lots of other nutrients in the other nuts and seeds. Vegetables, there's just a listing here, but this includes all of our vegetables. They're very high in a lot of nutrients. Take a guess for me. There's something called phytochemicals, and phyto means plant and chemicals are chemicals. So phytochemicals are chemicals that are found in the plants naturally that give us a benefit. They help us avoid cancer. They help our immune system to be strong. Take a guess for me. How many different plant chemicals or phytochemicals do you think that scientists have found so far that help us humans? Take a guess. How many?
I have not had the right answer yet, so I'm gonna let somebody else take a stab at it.
500.
500? That's a really good guess. Tony, are you typing in your answer? Oh, he's being shy. Actually,
Alice says a lot.
A lot? Okay. Actually, scientists have found 8,000 different plant chemicals that benefit us. So when we eat processed food that might be enriched with just a few things back, think about how many things we're actually taking away from ourselves. So when we eat things the way that they grow in the garden, the closest to the way they grow on the tree or in the field, we're just getting so many nutrients that we know a lot of, but there's a lot we don't know about. And that's the goal, to be able to eat things as whole as we can and as unprocessed as possible. If you like fruits and grains, all of these things have, the grains have the B vitamins and the fruits have folate. And again, all of them have, especially the fresh fruits, they have, the electrical energy in them, the sodium, a little bit of sodium in fruits, more potassium, chloride, and things that help our brain. And then other helpful things that help us with depression is that we want to eat our meals on a regular schedule, along with sleeping on a regular schedule. Make sure we get plenty of fiber, and we can get that in our whole plant foods too. The goal, especially for someone with diabetes, is to have more than 30 grams of fiber a day. And so you can get 2 or 3 grams of fiber in each whole food, like if you have a serving of fruits or vegetables or whole grains, then that's about 2 to 3 grams of fiber per serving. So if you're eating, 5, 6 servings of vegetables a day, 3 or 4 servings of fruits a day, a handful or 2 of beans, and maybe some whole grains, you're getting plenty of fiber. And that helps a lot of things with our digestion, but also helpful for fighting depression. We want to make sure to have adequate water. How much water should we be drinking every day? Do you know?
They always say eight glasses, but I don't know if that's right or not. Mm-hmm.
That's a good general start, but if you want to get a little bit more personal about it, it's we take our weight and divide our weight in half, and that's how many ounces we need, and then we want to divide that through the day. So a 200-pound person would need about 100 ounces of water, divided by maybe 4 servings a day, about 20, 25 ounces per serving. And that water really helps to get our circulation going. If we don't have enough water on board, then our circulation is more thick and sludgy. And so we know that if we're having some sludge in our frontal lobe, that it might lead more toward depression because it decreases the circulation. Now, ginkgo biloba and St. John's wort, those are 2 natural remedies for depression, or they help to fight depression, but they do interact with other medications. So there's 3 stars there saying, check with your doctor, check with your pharmacist. Don't just start taking them because they may interact with other medications you're taking. But if you're not taking any other medications and you have a little bit of depression going on, then these things have helped in the past. Massage always helps, relaxes us, right? Makes us feel better. Also increases our circulation. Now, the hot and cold showers, again, you want to talk to your doctor if you have had a history of heart disease, or if your heart's not as strong as it should be, then you might want to aim for warm and cool showers instead of hot and cold showers. But this is how you do it. You get into the shower and you turn on the water as warm as you can stand it until you feel your temperature rise, like, whew, it's getting warm enough. I really need to get out of here. And when you start getting warm like that, your temperature goes up. Then you want to turn it to cold for about 30 seconds and dance around, woo-hoo-hoo-hoo, and that cold water will hit you. And then you turn it back on hot for about 4 or 5 minutes, back on cold a second time, third time hot for 4 to 5 minutes, and then third time cold for 30 seconds. Turn off the shower, rub yourself briskly off with a towel and put some sweat clothes on or pajamas on, and jump in the bed and stay there at least an hour. It's good if you do it, before you go to bed. But what that does, it not only helps us avoid depression, but it doubles or triples our white blood cell count. So if you feel like you're catching a cold or a virus, feel like you're getting sick, if you do a hot and cold shower once or twice a day, then it really helps your immune system to fight off anything that you might be fighting. And it also helps with depression as well. But again, if your heart's not that strong, you can do warm and cool showers. Just talk to your doctor about that. We already talked about sleeping on a regular schedule and going to bed as early as you can before midnight. And then there are some prescription medications that can contribute to depression. So any medication that you're on for blood pressure or cholesterol or anything else that you're taking, always read those inserts, because if depression is indicated, you might want to talk to your doctor about, maybe prescribing you something else, so it might not contribute to that depression. So again, in research done on the success of Dr. Nedley's program, over 80% of the people dealing with depression were able to get off their depression medication successfully in 20 weeks and stay off. So hopefully this was helpful for you and gave you a little bit of food for thought. And when Natalie puts this or sends you the link to be able to watch it again, you'll have those slides and PowerPoint so you can use them as a guide. So is this helpful for you?
It was very helpful for me, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate that you tuned in, and please make sure to come to our D2 and Me sessions. It's usually pretty interesting, or anytime I've seen it's always been interesting. So Natalie's really good about lining folks up, and she tries to provide presentations that are really going to help people. So thank you again for coming. And if you have any questions, Natalie can send you my contact information.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you, Roberta.
All right. Have a good evening.
Thank you.